My husband went on vacation with his girl bestie. So my fiancé, Julian, just texted me asking if we can meet for dinner tonight because he needs to discuss wedding expectations. And it's important. The same Julian who spent the last 6 weeks planning a month-long trip to Thailand with his female best friend, Sienna, framing our upcoming marriage as him losing his freedom and needing one last adventure before settling down. Yeah. That Julian. I'm sitting here staring at my engagement ring, wondering what fresh nightmare he's about to drop on me tonight. Because if the last 6 weeks have taught me anything, it's that every conversation with him lately ends with me questioning my sanity. After listening to him quote Sienna's relationship wisdom like she's some kind of guru, after finding their secret text threads calling me jealous and controlling, after watching him book an entire escape with another woman 2 months before our wedding, I'm starting to think this dinner is going to be the breaking point. Let me explain how we got here, because I need to process this before I walk into whatever he has planned for tonight. 6 weeks ago, Julian came home from Sunday brunch with Sienna and announced they'd been having a really important conversation about our future. His energy was weird, nervous but excited, like someone about to pitch an idea they know is controversial. I was folding wedding RSVPs at the dining table, checking off names of people who'd already booked flights and hotels to watch us get married in 2 months, when he sat down across from me with this serious expression. He said Sienna had opened his eyes to something he'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. That marriage is forever. And forever is a really long time. And before he committed to forever, he needed to make sure he knew who he was as an individual. Because once we got married, he'd be locked into family obligations and responsibilities and routines, and he'd never have another chance to be spontaneous and free and himself. So he needed one last trip before the wedding. 1 month in Thailand with Sienna. To find himself before he lost himself in marriage. I just stared at him. I had a stack of RSVPs in my hand, cards from people celebrating us, people who believed in us. And I asked him if this was a joke. He said no. He was completely serious. He told me Sienna takes these freedom trips with all her friends before they get married. And she'd been explaining to him how crucial it is for his mental health, and for our future relationship, that the strongest marriages are between 2 people who know themselves as individuals first. I asked why he couldn't take a trip with his guy friends. Or why we couldn't take a trip together before the wedding. He said his guy friends would just want to party and wouldn't give him space for real self-reflection. And taking a trip with me would defeat the entire purpose. Because he needed distance from us to figure out if he was truly ready for us to become permanent. He needed to experience life without me, to make sure he wanted life with me. The way he said it made our engagement sound like a mistake he needed to verify. Like proposing had been impulsive and now he needed to check his work. When I pointed that out, he got defensive and told me I was being dramatic. He said engagement is just a promise, but marriage is legally binding. And it was actually mature of him to make sure he was mentally prepared. That most people don't have the self-awareness to recognize their needs before it's too late. Over the next few weeks, the arguments were constant. Every conversation circled back to his trip. He'd already started planning with Sienna. I'd overhear their calls about temples and beaches and full moon parties. They had itineraries mapped out like they were going on their honeymoon. And when I tried to talk to him about my concerns, he shut me down with therapy speak. He said I was trying to control his autonomy. That my discomfort with his female friendships revealed my insecurities. That if I really trusted him, I wouldn't have a problem with this. He kept quoting Sienna like she was an enlightened expert. Sienna says couples who give each other radical freedom have the strongest bonds. Sienna thinks people who need constant reassurance aren't ready for marriage. Sienna believes you need to explore this now or you'll resent her later. Every concern I raised, every boundary I tried to set, was met with something Sienna had apparently said about why I was wrong. I finally snapped and asked when Sienna became the authority on our relationship. She'd been single for 3 years. She'd never even lived with a partner. Never been engaged. What qualified her to give advice about marriage? Julian gave me this pitying look and said that's exactly why her perspective was valuable. Because she wasn't emotionally compromised like I was. She could see our relationship objectively while I was too invested in the wedding to think clearly about the marriage. Too invested in the wedding. Our wedding. The one we'd been planning together for 8 months. Suddenly that was a character flaw. Then I found the messages. I wasn't snooping. Julian left his iPad open on the kitchen counter, and the messaging app was right there. Months of conversations between him and Sienna that made my blood run cold. Her pushing and pushing. Are you sure she's the one? You're only 29. You have your whole life ahead of you. She seems very focused on the wedding. But is she focused on your happiness? Marriage is forever. You need to be absolutely certain. And Julian responding. Sometimes I wonder if I'm settling. What if I'm just doing this because it's what's expected? I love her, but is that enough? You're right. I need to really think about this. The worst message was from 3 weeks ago. Sienna wrote, if she really loves you, she'll support this trip. If she fights you on it, you'll know she's more interested in controlling you than understanding you. Julian responded, you're right. This will be a good test of whether she's ready to be a wife. A test. 2 months before our wedding, our relationship had become a test designed by another woman. When I confronted him about the messages, he didn't apologize. He told me I'd invaded his privacy. And that me snooping proved Sienna's point about my trust issues. I told him I didn't have trust issues. I had a fiancé planning to leave me for a month with another woman issues. He said I was being dramatic and manipulative, twisting things to make him the villain when he was just trying to be honest about his needs. Every feeling I expressed got reframed as a personality defect. I was controlling. Insecure. Not ready for marriage. Too focused on the wedding. Too emotional. Too reactive. According to Julian, I was basically a walking collection of red flags that he was generously trying to work through because he loved me despite my flaws. Last week, he officially announced he was going through with it. He'd bought plane tickets. Booked accommodations. Planned the whole thing with Sienna. 5 weeks in Thailand and Bali. It had grown from 4 weeks without him even telling me. Leaving in 2 weeks. Getting back 1 week before the wedding. When I asked how he could make such a massive decision without my input, he said he had considered my input, but ultimately his mental health had to come first. That he couldn't start our marriage already feeling resentful about missing this opportunity. I asked if he understood how insulting it was that marrying me required a month-long escape first. He said I was twisting his words again. This wasn't about escaping me. It was about finding himself. And the fact that I couldn't see the difference proved exactly why he needed space. Every conversation ended the same way. Me somehow being the problem. My concerns were invalid. My feelings were irrational. My boundaries were controlling. And through it all, Sienna's voice in his ear, telling him he was right and I was wrong. So that's where we were when he texted me about dinner. 6 weeks of fighting. 6 weeks of being gaslit. 6 weeks of watching my fiancé plan an escape from our marriage before it even started. And now he wanted to discuss wedding expectations. Part of me stupidly hoped maybe he was finally coming to his senses. But a much bigger part of me knew exactly what this was. He was going to announce he was going regardless of how I felt, probably with a whole speech prepared about what I needed to work on while he was gone. Well, I was done being the accommodating fiancé. Time to hear what he had to say. That night, I got to the restaurant early and spent 15 minutes giving myself a pep talk. I still had this tiny, embarrassing hope that maybe the man I fell in love with would show up. I should have known better. Julian walked in with this confident energy that immediately set me on edge. He kissed my cheek like everything was normal, sat down, and ordered us a bottle of wine like we were celebrating. When the waiter left, I asked him straight up what this dinner was about. He leaned back in his chair and said he'd been reflecting a lot on our relationship and our upcoming marriage. His tone was like a therapist explaining things to a difficult patient. He said our recent disagreements about his trip had revealed concerning patterns in my thinking that we needed to address before moving forward with the wedding. I asked what patterns. He pulled out his phone and showed me notes. Notes. Like he'd written down a list of my character flaws. He started with how I reacted emotionally instead of rationally to his trip announcement. How I made his needs about my insecurities instead of supporting his personal growth. How I seemed more focused on the wedding than the marriage, which worried him about my priorities. Every point felt like a punch to the gut, but I stayed quiet because I needed to hear how deep this went. Then he got to the real point. He said he'd decided that he was going on the trip regardless of my feelings. That he couldn't let my discomfort dictate his choices or he'd end up resenting me for the rest of our marriage. He said it like he was being noble. Like he was doing us a favor by establishing boundaries before we said vows. I asked if he understood that most people would consider planning a month-long vacation with another woman 2 months before their wedding to be a massive red flag. Not a boundary. He said that's exactly the kind of conventional thinking that stifles relationships. And then he launched into what he had planned for me while he was gone. He said, "I think you should use this time to really focus on preparing for your role as my wife." I asked what he meant. He smiled like he was about to give me helpful advice. He said since I'd been so focused on my career, I hadn't thought about the domestic side of marriage. That his mom had mentioned I didn't know how to make his favorite meals. So maybe I could take some cooking classes. That I could use the time to practice making our house more of a home instead of just a place we sleep. Then he kept going. He said marriage would require me to shift my priorities. Maybe consider going part-time at work eventually. So I could focus more on our home life and future family. That Sienna had opened his eyes to how important it is for wives to support their husbands' ambitions instead of competing with them. That the strongest marriages have clear roles and expectations. And he wanted to establish those roles now. Before we made things official. I finally found my voice and asked if he was seriously telling me I needed to become a 1950s housewife while he went on vacation with another woman. He got frustrated and said I was twisting his words. That he just wanted me to understand marriage requires sacrifice and compromise, and right now he wasn't seeing much willingness to compromise from me. I pointed out I'd been compromising our entire relationship while he demanded I accept increasingly disrespectful behavior. He said that's exactly what he meant about my attitude. I saw support as disrespect. Which revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of partnership. Then came the line that made me realize I was talking to a stranger. He said, supportive wives don't question their husbands' friendships. And if I couldn't handle him having close women friends, then I wasn't ready for marriage. Part of being a wife was trusting your husband completely and not creating drama where none exists. So I asked him how he'd feel if the roles were reversed. If I announced I was taking a month-long trip with a male friend 2 months before our wedding. Told him to use the time to work on being a better husband. And suggested he go part-time at work to support my career. The look on his face said everything. For a second his mask slipped, and I saw pure outrage. Then he caught himself and said it would be different because men and women have different relationship needs. That women are naturally more nurturing and home-focused. While men need more freedom and independence. That comparing our situations wasn't fair because the dynamics are fundamentally different. I told him that was sexist. He said it wasn't sexist. It was biological reality. And the fact that I was offended showed how influenced I'd been by modern feminist nonsense that was destroying healthy relationships. I couldn't even respond. I just stared at him, wondering when he became this person, or if he always was, and I'd been too blind to see it. He took my silence as agreement and laid out his expectations for the next 2 weeks before he left. I'd stop complaining about his trip. I'd work on my domestic skills and my attitude. I'd think seriously about my career trajectory and how it would fit into our marriage. And I'd apologize to Sienna for being unwelcoming and hostile toward their friendship. Apologize. To the woman poisoning my relationship for months. I asked if he was joking. He said he was serious. He said Sienna had been nothing but supportive, and I treated her terribly because I was jealous and insecure. Then I asked about logistics. Would we talk every day? Would I be involved in wedding decisions? He got uncomfortable. He couldn't promise daily communication because he needed true separation. He said I should handle wedding details myself since I clearly cared about them more. He needed flexibility. No specific check-ins. Because that would defeat the purpose of freedom. So I asked a simple question. If I decided to fly out and surprise him, would Sienna be comfortable with me visiting? The way he immediately said no told me everything. He stumbled through an excuse that Sienna wasn't comfortable with me because of how I reacted, and bringing my energy into their trip would ruin the experience. My fiancé was going on a month-long vacation with a woman who didn't want me around, and somehow I was the problem. I leaned back and really looked at him. And all I saw was a man who wanted a maid and a cheerleader, not a wife. Someone who wanted to be listened to, not challenged. Someone who thought marriage meant I'd lose myself while he gained freedom. So I asked him one last question. Do you even want to marry me? He looked offended and said of course he did. That's why he was trying to work through issues now. I told him he didn't want to marry me. He wanted to marry a version of me that didn't exist. Someone who'd stay home and cook while he traveled. Someone who'd never question him or have needs. Someone who'd put his freedom above her dignity. He said I was being dramatic again. And that this was exactly why he needed the trip, to get clarity on whether I was capable of being the partner he needed. By the time we left the restaurant, it was crystal clear. He was going. I was expected to spend the time working on myself. And when he got back, we'd reevaluate whether I'd grown enough to deserve to marry him. Like I should be grateful he was giving me a second chance to prove I was worthy. I sat in my car after, shaking with fury. But I wasn't sad. I was done. While Julian was busy explaining all the ways I needed to change, I was making my own decisions. He wanted freedom. He wanted someone to show him what a supportive partner looks like. Fine. I was about to give him a masterclass in both. The next morning, I woke up with complete clarity. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to give him the emotional reaction he was expecting. I started making calls. First, I called my boss and requested 3 weeks of vacation starting in 2 weeks. Then I called a travel agent and booked the trip of a lifetime to Greece. Santorini. Mykonos. Crete. Solo. Leaving the exact same day as Julian's Thailand trip. When Julian texted me that afternoon asking if I'd had time to think about what we discussed, I replied sweetly that I had. He called immediately. I answered cheerfully and told him I'd been thinking a lot about freedom and personal growth. And he was right. We both needed space to figure out who we were as individuals. So I booked myself a 3-week trip to Greece. The silence on the other end was perfect. Then he started sputtering about wedding planning and vendor meetings and dress fittings. I reminded him that he said I was too focused on wedding details and should focus on personal growth. So I was taking his advice. He asked who I was going with. I said I was going solo. He said that was different because I had responsibilities at home. I asked what responsibilities. The cooking classes he suggested? I told him I could learn to cook Greek food in Greece just as easily as I could learn his mom's pot roast here. By the time we hung up, he was unsettled but couldn't argue without being a hypocrite. That evening, I posted my plane tickets on Instagram. Some people get pre-wedding anxiety. I'm getting pre-wedding adventures. Sometimes the best marriages start with 2 people who truly know themselves. Julian called within minutes, demanding to know what it meant. I told him it meant I was being supportive of his philosophy. The next 2 weeks were gold. Julian kept sending me photos of his suitcase, his travel backpack, asking if he should bring nice shoes. I responded with increasingly pointed comments about sunscreen for beach clubs with Sienna, and outfits for sunset dinners. He couldn't tell if I was supportive or sarcastic, and it drove him insane. Then departure day came. We both left for the airport. Him for Bangkok. Me for Athens. The look on his face when he saw my packed bags was priceless. He'd hoped I'd come around and see him off like a good little fiancé. Instead, I was bright-eyed and excited for my own adventure. The first 2 days in Greece, I posted gorgeous photos from Santorini. White buildings, blue skies, sunsets, wine tasting, exploring villages. Meanwhile, Julian posted tourist stuff. Temples. Street markets. Him and Sienna making goofy faces. Then on day 3, his posts changed. Beach clubs. Pool parties. Sienna in almost every photo wearing almost nothing. Different bikinis, different days, her practically draped over him. One post showed her in his hotel bathrobe on the balcony with coffee. Caption about living freely. My best friend Mara was screenshotting everything and sending it to me with skull emojis. I didn't comment. I was too busy actually living. On day 3 in Santorini, I wandered into a family-owned restaurant overlooking the sea. The owner's grandson, Nico, took my order. We started talking, and I ended up staying for hours. Over the next few days, Nico became my guide and my friend. He showed me hidden beaches, little villages tourists never see. He taught me to cook traditional dishes in his grandmother's kitchen. And I started posting about it, tastefully. Cooking lessons. Scenery. Family dinners. Moments that felt real. Fully clothed, unlike the softcore resort where catalog Julian was posting. The contrast was brutal. His looked like a spring break party. Mine looked like a life-changing cultural experience. Julian noticed. His text shifted from casual to concerned. Who's that guy in your stories? Are you hanging out with locals? Why aren't you answering your phone? I responded hours later, breezy. Having an amazing time. Thought we were both enjoying our freedom. By week 2, Julian's texts turned panicked. We need to talk about boundaries. I don't think it's appropriate for you to be spending so much time with some random guy. Are you even thinking about our wedding? So I reminded him of his own words. That opposite-sex friendships were normal. That anyone uncomfortable with them was insecure. That I should be trusting. He couldn't argue. I was using his script. Meanwhile, I was happier than I'd been in years. Nico treated me like an equal. No tests. No lectures. No rewriting my boundaries as insecurity. Just kindness. Real connection. And the more I experienced that, the more I realized what Julian had been doing to me. By the end of week 2, Julian was trying to video call me constantly. I declined. Texted that I was busy. On the rare times I answered, I kept it short and calm. Yes, I was having an amazing time. Yes, Nico was wonderful. Yes, I was learning about myself. Then I'd hang up because we were heading to dinner with his family, or a beach, or another adventure. Then one day, Julian's messages turned desperate. We need to talk immediately. Something happened with Sienna. I want to come home early. This trip was a mistake. I didn't care. I was sitting at a beach bonfire with Nico and his friends, laughing at my broken Greek, eating incredible food, feeling like I could finally breathe. Some people plan freedom trips to test their partners. But real freedom has nothing to do with tests. It's about choosing yourself and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Then came the last update. Julian video called me, and I finally answered. I was at Nico's family restaurant during golden hour, the sun setting behind me. I looked genuinely happy. Because I was. Julian looked wrecked. He was calling from some dingy hostel in Bangkok. He immediately launched into a sob story. Sienna met some Australian guy named Dylan and ditched him. He'd been alone in Thailand. The trip wasn't what he expected. He wanted to come home early and work on us. I felt nothing. Just relief I hadn't wasted more time. I told him calmly, I'm not coming home, Julian. He froze. What do you mean you're not coming home? I said, I'm staying in Greece. The wedding is off. He exploded. Over some vacation fling? You're throwing away our relationship for some guy you just met? I stayed calm. You threw it away when you told me marrying you meant losing your freedom. Turns out I was the one trapped. He begged. He apologized. He tried to negotiate. I cut him off. I've spent 3 weeks with someone who treats me as an equal. Someone who doesn't need to run away to another country with another woman to decide if he wants me. He switched to rage. Screaming that I was vindictive and irrational. That Nico was using me. That I'd regret it. So I smiled. Speaking of using people, how's Sienna? Oh wait. She left you. Then I said what I needed to say. You're going to cancel the wedding vendors. You're going to tell everyone why it's off. And you're going to leave me alone. He tried one last manipulation. I'm giving you one last chance to stop being ridiculous before we're done. I laughed. We've been done since you told me to learn to cook while you partied with another woman. Then I hung up. Blocked his number. And I kissed Nico for the first time. Properly. And it felt like coming home in a way my actual home never had. My phone exploded with messages later. Julian had started calling people with his version of the story. But Mara had already sent everyone screenshots of his bikini-filled posts, And the part where he told me to take cooking classes and prepare for my role as a wife while he was gone. The support was overwhelming. A few days later, Mara sent me the tea. There was no Dylan. Sienna drained Julian's bank account, maxed out his credit cards, stole his passport, and disappeared. He'd been stranded for weeks. Had to call his parents for emergency money. And apparently, she'd done it to multiple men. Fake identity. Fake friendship. Real theft. Julian threw away our relationship for a scammer who saw him coming. And all those bikini photos? Still online. The internet is forever. Months later, I was still in Greece. I extended my stay. I worked remotely. I learned Greek from Nico's grandmother. I became part of their family. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Julian wanted freedom. He got it. Just not the kind he imagined. And I got something better. A life where I'm valued, respected, and truly free. Living well really is the best revenge.